Hello everyone! On this weekend 50 years ago, a great white shark was let loose in theaters, and it's been making a splash ever since. In honor of this anniversary, here are my thoughts on 1975's Jaws. Directed by Steven Spielberg, Jaws stars Roy Scheider as the chief of police on Amity Island. Just before the summer season kicks off, a shark attacks and kills a couple swimmers. Chief Brody responds by closing the beaches, but then he faces backlash from locals determined not to scare away tourists. Forced to take matters into his own hands, Brody joins an eccentric sea captain, played by Robert Shaw, and a young oceanographer, played by Richard Dreyfuss, on a hunt for a great white shark. Somebody asked on my What Else I Saw in May video a couple weeks ago if I'd be talking about Jaws for its 50th anniversary, and I was like, I don't know. I don't typically do anniversary specials, and I don't typically review movies that are this well known. I tend to take the road less traveled, spotlighting films that don't get as much coverage. But as I mulled it over, I realized I hadn't seen Jaws in an awfully long time, and I would like to, and there was plenty I could say about it. Plus, I wasn't super invested in what I did have planned for this weekend, so I said, heck, let's do it. Jaws has been added to a few different streaming channels, which I don't have. I was able to stream it on Tubi for free with ads. Yes, the commercials are kind of annoying, but there were only about half a dozen ad breaks. It wasn't that bad, and the experience wasn't that different from what it was like watching it on TV all the time when I was a kid. Jaws is widely considered the biggest and the best shark movie. It launched its own subgenre, it spawned a bunch of copycats, it has a dubious set of sequels, and it's been imitated and referenced again and again. I saw Jaws many times when I was younger, or at least I saw parts of it many times. I may have only caught the opening scene once, and I'm not sure I'd ever seen the main titles before. But there was a period where it played on TV frequently, and my mom would often stop on it. We'd watch a large chunk of it, we'd watch all the way to the end. So there were parts I became familiar with, and watching it again for the first time in a long time, I realized just how familiar. I was bombarded with rekindled memories, and I kept thinking, oh, I remember that side character, I remember that line, I remember the way that actor does that thing. I don't think Jaws is wholly to blame for my fear of the ocean, but it may bear a little responsibility. I can't say I'm a fan of sharks, but I don't really care for whales or squid or octopi or any of those things that much. I don't like the massiveness of the ocean, the darkness, the depth of it, and all of the things that may be in it. I don't know, it just gives me the willies. And while I love sea air, I don't feel comfortable being way out on open water. So, in that regard, I find Chief Brody particularly relatable. He doesn't like boats, he doesn't like water, he's afraid of drowning, which is why it's kind of insane that he's moved to an island. Martin Brody is still new to his role, having recently transplanted his family from New York City to this New England community. It's a big transition from urban crooks and criminals to the petty squabbles and provincial complaints of the islanders, many of them fishermen with a lackadaisical attitude toward authority. Hence the pushback when he demands they close the beaches right before their 4th of July opening. Most of this resistance comes from the mayor, played by Murray Hamilton. I know Hamilton was in plenty of other things, and he's not a jerk in those other things, but this infuriating character, with his loud, flashy suits and his entourage and his smarmy used car salesman aura, is what he is most remembered for. I like the way Roy Scheider plays Brody as a very human figure. He's a family man, he's likable, he's capable at his job, but he's also a worrier, kind of reserved, not a natural fit for a job that requires some schmoozing. He's also not exactly a natural companion for Hooper or Quint, who are both more wild and adventurous. But he's a conscientious policeman whose priority is public safety. Therefore, he refuses to drop the issue. And then when his own son is affected, he faces his fears and ventures out on the Orca to get the shark. He's a great, I would say, underrated protagonist. He's joined by Matt Hooper, Richard Dreyfuss, a shark expert from the Oceanographic Institute. He's a hot-tempered spitfire with a contempt for blue-collar snobbery, which puts him at odds with Quint, Robert Shaw. Though Brody is the main character, these two men are both scene stealers, especially Quint, a nutty sea captain whose growling drawl sounds so natural that I was shocked when I eventually learned Robert Shaw was British. If Shaw had been an inferior actor, or if the character had been shot in a different way, Quint may have just been a scenery-chewing ham, someone too over the top to take seriously. But as it is, he becomes a fascinating, insanely unpredictable focal point, endearing even as you wonder if he might be a megalomaniac. There's classist friction between Quint and Hooper, and allegedly between the actors there was tension, Shaw perceiving Dreyfuss to be an arrogant young upstart. I'm not sure how much of a feud there really was, though. There are a lot of stories out there about the making of Jaws, and some of them are true, some of them are myths, and some of them have a bit of truth, but may be blown out of proportion. Stories about feuding actors on set often get blown out of proportion, especially these days where people are trying to get clicks on video essays and articles. Robert Shaw can't tell us anything because he died just a few years after the movie came out. His son wrote and produced and starred in a play about the making of Jaws, focusing on these three actors being on the Orca and the tension between them, really dramatizing this alleged feud. But Richard Dreyfuss was able to go and see the play and see this depiction of himself and this depiction of this alleged feud, and he says the claims aren't true. But if there was genuine tension, I think it only helped make the on-screen aggravation feel more authentic. And then that makes the scene where they get drunk and joke around and compare scars that much more enjoyable. It's a fun, silly scene until Quint reveals he was a survivor of the USS Indianapolis. This is a scene I did not fully appreciate when I was a kid. I laughed at the funny parts, and I enjoyed when they all sang along with each other, but I could not fully appreciate the second half of it. Not the abrupt mood shift, not Shaw's hypnotic delivery, and not Quint's harrowing tale. Now I understand why it's one of the most famous movie monologues. There are so many great and quotable lines in the script. The most famous one, of course, is, "You're gonna need a bigger boat." But there are a lot more. I know some people are big fans of the, you go in the cage, cage goes in the water, you go in the water, shark's in the water, our shark. I think I got that right. I had forgotten about "That's some bad hat, Harry," and also I'd forgotten about "I don't have to take this abuse much longer." I don't know why Richard Dreyfuss said the line that way, but it's funny. I remember now that it always tickled me when I was a kid. I'd completely forgotten about it, but when it happened again, I was like, I remember that! I would say the lines I quote the most, besides "bigger boat," which, I don't know, there's just so many times in life, I don't know how this is, but there are so many occasions when I find myself saying, "You're gonna need a bigger boat." Do other people do that? I can't be the only one. I can't be the only dork that does that. But another one that comes up a lot for me and my mom is, "I'm not going to stand here and see that thing cut open and see that little Kintner boy spill out all over the dock." And then one that I say that nobody ever recognizes is, "A what?" I have said it somewhere in another video. Nobody recognizes it because there's no context. There's nothing that would tell you, oh, that's from Jaws. The context is, what kind of shark is it? A tiger shark. A what? The screenplay was co-written by Peter Benchley and Carl Gottlieb, an adaptation of Peter Benchley's original novel. Benchley does make a cameo appearance in the film. I have read the book. I did not like it. Whenever someone asks me for an example where the film adaptation is better than the book, my go-to answer is Jaws. There was just a lot that put me off. It was partly the content and partly the style. At times I was bored, and at others I was disgusted and bored. Thankfully, the script trims down the bureaucracy and completely cuts the subplot with Ellen Brody's extramarital affair. And the script has more humor. Not that the movie's a knee slapper, it shouldn't be, but there are lighthearted moments and interactions that feel realistic and just make it better all around. The film also changes the ending, which I'm okay with. I know that some people feel differently about that, but in pretty much every way, I prefer the movie. The film uses its advantage in being a visual medium, and an aural one as well. John Williams' famous two-note motif gives the shark a voice, and is a chilling way to announce his presence even when you can't see him. What 1960's Psycho did for showers, 1975's Jaws did for sharks. For better or for worse. I know that animal lovers hate this movie, and Spielberg himself regrets what it did to the shark population and the marine population in general. Right out of the gate, it establishes itself as a horror adventure, startling viewers with the brutality of the first attack. The victim's blood-curdling screams as she's yanked back and forth in the water are absolutely terrifying. While it's my impression that Jaws pays tribute in the beginning to one of my favorite monster movies, 1954's Creature from the Black Lagoon, with its atmospheric underwater shark POV shots, Spielberg quickly distinguishes himself as an ambitious and imaginative director. This beach scene, for example, has beautifully smooth editing, and then there's a deep focus shot, and then that iconic dolly zoom. He pulls out all the tricks and reminds us that there's no reason why a monster movie or a horror movie can't be artistic as well. The props department whipped up some impressive body parts, especially that severed leg, but it's the decomposing head jump scare that always terrified me the most. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. That whole sequence is unsettling, with the eerie lighting above and below the water, and the idea of diving in the dark, and then, whoa! It got me really good the first couple times, and then after that, I was like, I'm not gonna look, I don't want to see the scene. I think I even left the room once. But this time, I was a big girl, I looked, and I felt like, okay, that wasn't so bad. But it's because I knew, I was bracing for it, I knew, and well, I have kind of desensitized myself to a certain degree. The cage sequence is also alarming and scary. I feel like that's the one that drove home to me how huge this shark is. Maybe because it's the scene where they actually use footage of a real shark. Also, I forgot how awful and violent and bloody the death scene after it is. I watched this as a child. It's one of the few instances where we see a lot of the shark out of the water, and I know some people disagree about this. They feel like when you see more of the shark, you can tell, okay, that's fake, it looks like an animatronic, but I think it looks great. At least when you're watching the movie. In pictures, much has been said and written about what a nightmare this production was. For 26-year-old Steven Spielberg, it was a nearly traumatic experience. The great white shark, affectionately nicknamed Bruce, was played by 3 animatronics, and these mechanical sharks had innumerable issues and often broke down, plus there were the human actors to deal with, and the difficulties of filming on the open sea. It's one of those movies where the more you learn about what a troubled production it was, the more amazing it is that, number one, they were able to finish the darn thing, and number two, it turned out so well. All that hard work and determination and frustration paid off. And truthfully, I think some of these issues worked in the movie's favor. It's just as well they couldn't rely as heavily on the animatronics, because this is an instance where less is more. The shark doesn't need to be visible to be a threat. On the contrary, not being on camera for much of it makes it seem more mysterious and sinister. The final third of the story is reminiscent of Herman Melville's Moby Dick. But who is Captain Ahab? Is it Quint, the hoary, arrogant, single-minded sea captain who had his leg chomped on and may want revenge on sharks after his Indianapolis experience? Or is it Brody, whose concern about the shark becomes a fixation, goaded by a feeling of personal responsibility? They're kind of splitting the role. Although the way things turn out, Brody is also more like Ishmael. I like that Brody gets such a heroic ending. He braves the water, he uses his brain, and kills the shark in a spectacular fashion. He even gets to drop a one-liner. I talked about the bridge on the River Kwai recently and how it had one of the best explosions in film history. Jaws has another of the best explosions in film history, in my opinion. Jaws was a relatively low-budget movie that rocked the box office in the summer of '75. My mom was telling me what a big deal it was when it came out, how everyone was talking about it, and a third of the country went to see it. It was a stunning success, earning $260 million in its initial theatrical run, which is just an outrageous number for the time, and it became the first summer blockbuster, which is a concept that has lingered for the last half-century. The summer blockbuster does seem to be on its way out, but that's another subject. There's no end to the influence this movie has had on the industry, and its cultural impact is enormous. Here are a whole bunch of movies I thought of that may never have existed if Jaws hadn't come out first and paved the way. Without Jaws, there'd be no Bruce in Finding Nemo. There probably never would have been such a thing as Shark Week. But who knows how different Steven Spielberg's career would have been if this movie hadn't taken off, exploded, made so much money, made him a name, given him the opportunity to make even more huge movies. And who knows if John Williams would have become as famous as he did. I could go on and on. As far as the sequels go, they had much less of an impact. I'm 99% sure I've seen Jaws 2 in its entirety, and I guess it was okay. But the other two, I'm not sure I've seen more than the beginning of Jaws 3D. I did see a good deal of Jaws the Revenge once upon a time. I've forgotten most of it, and pretty much everyone makes me feel like I should keep it that way. That's the one where Michael Caine got paid $1 million for 1 week of work in the Bahamas, and later someone said to him, "Hey, I saw that Jaws 4, it stinks." And he was like, "I haven't seen it, but I have seen the house that it bought my mother, and that's marvelous." Really, the 1975 original is all you need. Jaws is a great movie. Solid actors playing memorable characters, clever writing, a satisfying blend of thrills, adventure, and relatable humor, practical effects that still hold up, and it's full of wonderful little moments and details that you might not notice on the first, the second, or the fifth viewing, but they're there, and they help make this film an enduring modern classic. It's 50 years old now. Can it still be considered modern? Compared to a lot of other stuff I watch, it is. I hope you enjoyed this review of Jaws. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this movie, so go ahead and share those in the comments below. And stay tuned because next week, it's that time again, I'll be dropping some bloopers. Thanks for watching.